will now be available. If I can get back to the other Sublime text. There we go. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to put something on the screen. So like Shalin mentioned the other day, the stuff that's actually on the screen is HTML. So anything that you see on the screen at some point, there's a tag and an element there. So I'm going to save a text file, maybe, on Shalin's desktop called index.html. And Sublime Text has a nice feature. Tell me if this is big enough for you all. If you start typing HTML, the first tag, you just hit enter. It'll fill out a little bit of a boilerplate for you. So to reiterate something that Shalin was saying, in HTML, everything you can think of as a tree. Everything's nested inside something else. So for example, everything between the opening HTML tag on line 2 and the closing one on line 11 is within the HTML element. Inside of that, there are two elements. There's the head tag that open and close on lines 4 and 6, and then the body tag. So the head tag is a place that you can put a bunch of like metadata about your page, whether it's linking to the title or whatever. And the body tag is where stuff actually appears, where the things that are being rendered happen. So for example, I open this in my browser right now. It's blank. It's to be expected. I can just type it in. Now I see hello. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to put a box up and make a box appear. And I'm sure some of you will get tired of us saying this because at least my approach, like when we were working together the other day, Connie, we couldn't make something work, and I was just like, let's make it with simpler boxes and simpler boxes. So one word for box in HTML is div, which is, I think Shalin was saying, short for division. That's also the historical. And if I just save that and refresh, I still have nothing. And you'll see something that might be valuable is that anytime you see something on a page that you're not sure why it's doing what it's doing or you're not sure what's going on, if you right-click on it and hit inspect, you'll bring up this developer console, which is useful. And among other things, it gives you a live version of the page that as you mouse over highlights the different elements and what's going on. So especially for fixing like positioning issues and things like that, that can be helpful. So right now, if you were wondering like why don't I see a box, I can open up the body tag and mouse over the div, and you'll see, I don't know if you guys can see this number, but it tells me, yeah, there's a div there, but it's 760 pixels wide and 0 pixels tall, so I can't see it. So if I want to change that, I have a few options. The first one is I can write some CSS, and one of the places that you can write some CSS is in the head tag. So if I put a style tag, anything I now write between this opening tag and this closing tag, the browser is going to interpret as CSS. And the way that CSS works is that you write a selector, which is just an HTML word, and then you have an open and a closing curly bracket. And in between those, you put anything that you want to modify, any element which matches this selector. In particular, its appearance, although like Shalin was saying, sometimes it can be the motion and things like that. So right now what I've done is I've said to the browser, hey, find everything that's a div and do something to it. So for example, I could say make the width 100 pixels and make the height 100 pixels, and I could save that. And so now if I come back to my page and refresh, I still see nothing. However, if I go inside of my body and mouse over my div, now you'll see that it's highlighting in blue a 100 by 100 pixel square, which I can't see because it's transparent. I haven't given it any color. So if I come back and I write background color blue, I now have a blue square. Does that make sense so far? Okay.
Those options when you are hovering over something,
yes.
These background, is that something special you installed?
No, so this is just built into your browser. It's something that's gotten much easier over the past, I'd say like 6 years, is the tools that just come built into your browser for debugging and understanding what's going on have gotten much better. So for example, every time I mouse over an element, the browser highlights a few things. So in the bottom right, you'll see that little diagram where there's a little blue square that says 766 by 116, a little green square around it, I guess yellowish orange square, and then full orange square. Each of those represent things that could get rendered on the page. So the blue thing is whatever element you're looking at. The green stuff is the padding, which if you think of the element's kind of boundary, it's the spacing between that boundary and whatever's inside the element. If, for example, you have a box, but you don't want the text inside the box to run right up to the edge.
I was thinking about the Sublime Text. autofill.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
autofill
You let me go on for quite a while. Okay, what?
It looked like an autofill. You started.
Oh,
one
yes,
way and
that-
then, is that something?
That comes with Sublime Text by default. However, in some of the instructions Shanlin will walk through later for getting her Poems project set up, we also link to a plugin called HTML CSS JS Prettify, which has a few other things that make typing it easier. But I can get rid of a lot of this stuff. It's just for convenience. So for example, I could get rid of the doc type thing, the head, basically everything else I want. But even if I were to delete HTML and other stuff, most things would keep working.
Basically, I think about the internet is that it's built to never, ever throw an error
That's right.
message, regardless of how bad your HTML is.
Right.
And
So for example, like I can delete everything except for this div, and the browser says, oh, I got just that div, but I'm going to surround it in HTML and body, and I'm going to put it in the right place, all that type of stuff, which is a blessing in some ways, but I find very problematic when debugging, because it means that oftentimes you'll do a thing, it'll ostensibly work, but something will be broken that will discover it later. Yeah.
And something else that I think we've alluded to is that in general, we are going to make stuff that works in Google Chrome,
Yes.
and we're going to use the Google Chrome developer tools.
Yep.
There are equivalents in other browsers if you like them, but like I think some people noticed when you looked at the people card in Safari, for example, it doesn't render like in the exact same way. So the stuff that we're sharing and that we'll share for the next 5 weeks is all I don't know what that's called. We've decided to use Google Chrome, and we encourage you to use it with us.
Yes.
Um,
Things are already tedious enough programming. I feel like browser interoperability is not something I'm actually talking about you about. So, okay, now we have a blue square, and the only thing that we have to do that is decide we want something on the screen, decide what HTML element that thing is best represented by, and then write some CSS that changes the way it looks. So in general, even after you've been doing this for a long time, I at least still find myself looking up what are the different tag names that I can use when it's not one of the like 4 that I use all the time. What are all the different CSS attributes, which are these things, that can control the way that something looks, and what's the syntax for them. So you shouldn't worry too much about like memorizing those, because you're always going to be looking them up. The thing to keep in mind is you're going to decide to put something on a page, and then you're going to decide how it looks. And you want to think about how you name a few things so that you can write CSS easily, and we'll get more into that in a bit. But if you find that you're not sure what to type, but you do know what effect you want, obviously Googling is a good approach. However, one resource I want to call it in particular is the Mozilla Developer Network, MDN. So this has basically kind of a reference of all the different HTML and CSS and JavaScript things that you can do in your browser. As a reference, it's not, they have some good tutorials as well. As a reference, the reference is not that approachable as like, I'm going to go learn HTML and CSS just by reading through these. So we've linked to a couple other resources that are better suited to that. But if you find yourself saying, I have an image, I want to make it black and white. Can CSS do that for me? You can like Google black and white CSS. Someone will mention something. They often won't provide good documentation for it. And then you can go to the Mozilla Developer Network and say, how does the desaturate filter work? So to come back to HTML and CSS, the way I've written this rule right now, it applies to all divs in my page. So this selector just says, go find it. Oh, I'm sorry, go for it.
So using Sublime Text, can you link to source CSS file?
Yes, absolutely. So
you don't have to do this style.
No. This you can use any text editor that you want. The reason we've chosen Sublime Text is because it's a free, reasonable editor that has features that make it nice to make web pages. That's right, free. Ben is doing the quotes because it nags you. I don't know.
I bought it, but it's good.
I'm sure he developed. He appreciates it. It's one person. Yeah, there are 2 people now. There's a person who does the business part, but the person who has built it is a single individual. If you do it if you try to do something like write it in Microsoft Word and save it, things won't work for boring reasons. But there are many other development environments, and we're happy to talk about alternatives if you have experience with one that you prefer. But to come back to your question about CSS, the browser just needs to get literally this text at some point. Putting a style tag at the top here, but you can also link to a file directly by saying, and we'll send more of this later, but saying, hey, I want to link you to a file, I'm going to point you at it. it's going to contain some CSS in it, and especially as projects grow, you want to organize stuff in another, so that as we integrate your people cards, we're just modifying the people.csv. So because of the way I've written this rule, one of the things it means I can do is I can make several divs, and it will apply to all of those divs. So I now have, I don't even know how many I put in, 4 divs. And this series of rules saying make every div's width 100 pixels, height 100 pixels, and the background color blue is applying to all of them. You'll find that in a lot of different elements, things don't do kind of like what you expect by default. So for example, when I first saw this, I would have expected the squares to just be next to one another, right? There are a lot of defaults in the ways different things get positioned and laid out that aren't going to be intuitive. You can find out about them not only by going through some of the resources we shared, but again, just by saying, hey, what is a div Mozilla Developer Network? And they will talk about why it has this particular behavior, because there are often other elements that are better suited to what you're trying to do if you find that the defaults in a particular tag or CSS attribute are fighting what you're trying to do with it. So in addition to divs, so there are things that let you do forms, or there are things that let you embed images, or there are things that let you have animations and canvases. There are many different tools, but I just want to focus on now like how the parts link together. So we're not going to go through what all those do. The point is just at some point you decide that there's some stuff. You put that stuff in your HTML. At some point you decide how you want that stuff to look. You put that in your CSS. And then for other types of behaviors, which we'll get to in a bit, you turn to JavaScript. So you guys have seen in your people cards that we weren't using selectors like this. Instead, you were saying something like hashtag Alec. And that syntax is another way of writing a selector, that instead of saying go find all the divs, you can say go find the element whose ID is Alec. So to the extent that a lot of programming is about bookkeeping and naming things appropriately so that you can call them out or grab just the set that you need to make them all blue or whatever, one of the decisions that you're making as you're laying stuff out on a page is how to name and annotate the different elements that you put on the page to make it easy to do the styling that you want. So for example here, to continue using the styling, I can now say the div's ID is Alec, and now I just have one div that's styled like that. IDs are meant to uniquely identify exactly one element on a page, so you shouldn't be using multiple of them on a page. If you wanted to use multiple of them, so let's say I wanted to have every other div one color, and like the even divs one color and the odd divs another color. One thing that I could do is I could make, I could split this out and say I want all of my divs to be 100 pixels tall and 100 pixels wide. I want my even divs to be blue. And I want my odd divs to be light blue. Okay. So you'll see I'm using a new syntax here, which is the dot. So an ID is for a single element, and it's represented by the hashtag. What's called a class is represented by a dot. And so the same way that I can say ID Alec, I can also say class equals odd. And I could copy and paste this into my first and my third one. And I could say class equals even for my second and my fourth one. So now if I come back to my browser and refresh, I have these alternating squares. And you'll notice that what I did is I said, what's going to be true of all divs? They're all 100 by 100, and I put that in this selector. And then I said, what's going to be true of just the even divs, just the divs that have the class even? It's this one. So CSS is a declaration of a bunch of rules that can overlap and conflict, and the browser is constantly trying to figure out how to resolve those conflicts and decide how to style any given element based on the rules that you've written. Does that make sense? So something else worth mentioning is that you guys have seen that there's also this syntax that looks like, let's do something like this. The colon hover, which we talked about as one pseudo selector. Let's the background. I don't know if light green is a color. I think. So what I've done here is I've said go find every element whose class is even and is hovered over, and set its background color to light green. And I think, if I did this correctly, it means that now I can hover over just the even ones, and those change, but the odd ones don't. And so there are a bunch of pseudo-selectors as well. In fact, one that we're not going to get into now is built to do this even and odd stuff. That's saying that you get all the even elements filed one way. You don't have to go through by hand doing class equals even. But the confusing thing, and the reason they're called pseudo-selectors, is because there's no hovered element out there. It's just giving you a way to declaratively say, go find something whose class is even and is kind of in the state of being hovered over, and then apply all of these attributes. And the attributes can be anything. We could change the width, for example, so that now when I hover over it, it gets twice as long and the color changes. But the stuff that goes between these curly braces is just a list of attributes and the new values that you want to apply. Yeah?
What if I wanted like the background of the whole web page?
Yes. So I often have trouble with this, specifically with the body, but I'm going to give it a shot. Say that again?
Oh,
okay. So my first instinct would be to say, what color? Blue. Is to do something like this. The thing that's surprising to me, well, it's hard to tell about this, I believe. Let me double check that this is true. Okay. In the past, when I've done that, it makes the whole page. So that's the confusing thing. But the body is just like any other element. So the same way that I can say make this div a particular color. Up here I said, what's the element that I want to get at, the body, and then what do I want to do to it? And then I make the background color blue.
Even like if I want like when I hover over even
The whole background. Yeah. So to do this, just make sure I understand. To do this only when I hover over.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you for the segue into talking about why we sometimes need JavaScript. So CSS lets you say, for a given element, do something to it. It doesn't make it easy to say, when something happens over here, do this other thing over here. Like what you're saying, when you hover over this element, do this. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this thing since it's not what we want. And I'm going to, the same way I added a style tag to make some room where I can write CSS, down here I'm going to add a script tag to make some room for where I write JavaScript.